Okay. Executive functions depend on prefrontal cortex and the other neural regions with which prefrontal cortex is interconnected. All of the cortex in front of the central sulcus is frontal cortex. All of this area is frontal cortex. So it's a huge expanse of the human brain. It's about 1/3 of the cortical area. So everything in front of the central sulcus is frontal cortex, and the front part of frontal cortex is prefrontal. So right in front of the central sulcus, you have motor cortex. Right in front of that, you have supplementary motor and premotor, and then you have prefrontal. And I don't think it's any accident that the motor areas of the brain are in the same lobe as prefrontal cortex, because we never evolved to think for thinking's sake. We evolved to think in order to help us act. So the action part of the brain is right next to and in the same lobe as the thinking part. Whether executive function gains are seen depends on the amount of time spent practicing, pushing yourself to improve, practicing the skills, and being continually challenged to improve. While training and challenging executive functions is needed to improve, that alone is probably not enough to achieve the best results. It's likely that indirectly supporting executive functions by lessening things that impair them, like stress or loneliness, and enhancing things that support them, like joy or physical vitality, is also critical. And here's why. Prefrontal cortex is the newest area of the brain and the most vulnerable. If you're sad or stressed, lonely, or not physically fit, prefrontal cortex and executive functions are the first to suffer and suffer the most. The reason for that has to do with some of the unusual properties of the prefrontal dopamine system, which I'll come to in a minute. Conversely, we show better executive functions when we're happy, feel socially supported, and we're healthy and physically fit. Our brains work better when we're not in a stressed emotional state, and that's particularly true for prefrontal cortex and executive functions. Stress impairs executive functions and can cause anyone to look as if he or she has an executive function impairment, like ADHD, when that's not the case at all. You may have noticed that when you're stressed, you can't think as clearly or exercise as good self-control. When I'm stressed, I reach for the chocolate. So some of the kids who are diagnosed in your school as ADHD probably don't have ADHD and may be stressed in ways that you don't know about, stressed at home, and that's coming out as ADHD, where really what the cause of it is stress. Teachers, psychologists, and physicians should routinely consider the possibility that a child who's misbehaving, a child or adult who's overeating, or an adult who's smoking, drinking too much, or using illicit drugs may not have too weak inhibitory control, insufficient willpower, but instead might be doing this in response to severe stress or in an attempt to escape the psychic pain or despair from severe early life stress or trauma. A child might be acting in the most awful manner because he's been terribly hurt and he's afraid to be hurt again. So he's going to push you away before you have a chance to push him away. Or he's going to test you to see if you're really somebody he can feel safe with. If we see the behavior as coming from hurt, we can react completely differently. James Harrigan said, "People need your love the most when they appear to deserve it the least." The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study, was an enormous study done in the US by Vince Felitti and Bob Anda. It had 17,000 participants, mostly middle class, 70% college educated throughout the US, 70% Caucasian. About 2/3 had experienced one adverse early life experience, and over 20% had experienced more than 3 categories of adverse early experiences. So an adverse early experience might be that your parents are separated or divorced. That's not that uncommon. It might be that you're getting beaten at home. It might be that you're getting yelled at a lot at home. It might be that somebody at home has mental illness or an addiction. There are lots of different categories, and a lot of these things are not that uncommon. I'm going to play this. It's very important.
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. In the words of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today.
Okay? If you have one adverse childhood experience, your risk really isn't increased at all. But 2 or more, it starts to go up dramatically and linearly. So you want to improve academic outcomes, want children to be able to problem solve, exercise self-control, or display any of the other executive functions? Reduce stress. Want to reduce how many children go on to suffer from compromised immune function, cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, asthma, chronic lung disease, depression, extreme anxiety, suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, that have children of their own as teenagers or out of wedlock, getting involved in an abusive relationship. And if you want to increase how many children do well in school, graduate from high school, go on to college, have a stable home in which to raise their own children, reduce stress, including the stress parents are under early in a child's life. We have no courses or training in how to be a good parent. We have courses in how to be a good parent to a dog. Many of us take dog obedience classes, but we have no training in how to be a good parent. We have courses in so many other things. Generations ago, when we all lived around family, we didn't need outside instruction or guidance on how to parent because the extended family helped us through it. To help parents, I think they need 2 things. One is that parents to be and first-time parents need training and mentoring in what makes good parenting and education on what to expect as their children go through the different developmental stages. And we need to help moms so they have emotional, social, and fiscal resources to be the best parent they can. Moms need mothering themselves. Research shows that improvements in mothers' personal well-being leads to better mothering and better child outcomes. Probably the best strategy for helping children thrive is to pair a wonderful program that supports the moms with a wonderful program for children. So why am I talking about moms when you're educators in the schools? Is because what happens at home has a major impact on what happens in school and how well they learn. And we tend to ignore the parents. We tend to not try to educate the parents or include the parents as much or help them out as much. And if we can just, for example, help them have support groups among themselves, just help organize that, it can make a huge difference. In Vancouver, they have something called Mom to Mom, where they have experienced moms paired with poor first-time moms. And the support moms are compassionate and respectful and just are trying to help, just trying to mother the mother. As trust builds, the volunteer mentor helps to connect the struggling mom to her child's school, to community resources, and to other mothers. You know, a lot of times a mother doesn't know where to go to, even for something like a dentist. Or there's no heat in the apartment. How are we going to get the heat turned back on? Just having help with that can be an enormous stress reducer. So stress, even mild stress, particularly affects prefrontal cortex, and I'm going to show you some of the biological reasons why. Dopamine is a very important neurotransmitter in the brain for many regions of the brain. But mild stress dramatically increases the level in prefrontal, but not any place else in the brain. All these other areas have dopamine. And some of the areas, like the striatum or nucleus accumbens, have a lot more dopamine than prefrontal. But mild stress doesn't increase the level. So prefrontal cortex needs dopamine, like your car engine needs gasoline. But if you flood your car engine with gasoline, now it can't work properly. If you flood prefrontal cortex with dopamine, now it can't work properly. And even mild stress floods prefrontal cortex for many people. Also, when you're stressed, your body releases cortisol. Prefrontal cortex has more receptors for cortisol than any other region of the brain. So cortisol is going to affect prefrontal more than any other brain region. And stress impairs the ability of prefrontal cortex to communicate with the other areas of the brain it's supposed to communicate with. So a few weeks of stress in preparation for a major exam disrupts the communication between prefrontal cortex and other brain regions. It comes back when you're not so stressed, but while you're stressed, it can't talk so well. And I'll give you an example of that a little bit later. Early life experiences disrupt neurodevelopment and alter brain structure and function. So whenever you see something that's threatening, something that's dangerous, something that's warning you of danger, the amygdala starts screaming like a fire alarm. So if you see an angry face, if you see a fearful face, your amygdala is going off, okay? So they did this study with neuroimaging, with fMRI, where they would show a face, and often it was, an angry or scary face, and they asked, which emotion is this face showing? Which word better describes this face? Then they asked, which face is showing the same emotion as this? Then this is a control condition. This is another control. Which name is the right gender for this face? Which face is the right gender for this face? And then another control condition. In all those conditions, when you see an angry or fearful face, the amygdala lights up. Only in that first condition, where you had to attach a verbal label, does amygdala activation go down. Okay? Even in the second condition, you presumably had to somehow figure out what the emotion is, because you have to figure which face is showing the same emotion. But only when you had to put it into words, even just one word, does amygdala activation go down. And what happens is that prefrontal activation goes up and amygdala activation goes down. They're inversely related. It's like prefrontal cortex says to the amygdala, calm down. You can calm down now. So the more activated prefrontal gets, the less activated the amygdala gets. And putting feelings into words has that effect. However, people who were exposed to adverse events at home growing up, early life experiences, show a strong positive relationship between prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Although they're recruiting prefrontal cortex for telling the amygdala to calm down, the amygdala isn't responding accordingly. It's like prefrontal cortex is unable to effectively regulate and calm down the amygdala. So this is what you see in most people who haven't had the adverse experiences, the inverse relationship. Prefrontal goes up and it tells it to calm down. Here, if you've had the early trauma, prefrontal activation goes up, but so does the amygdala. Prefrontal is unable to communicate properly to the amygdala. If you're stressed, you can't be the parent or teacher you want to be. If you're stressed, your children will pick up on it. It will cause them to feel stressed. And if they're stressed, their executive functions will suffer, and therefore their school performance will. So relax. Remember that imperfect is not the same as worthless. Now you say, well, I know that. But how many times do you get really down on yourself when you make a mistake? Don't be so hard on yourself. You can't be perfect. Nobody is. While being imperfect is not a problem, worrying about being imperfect, fretting over it, putting yourself down because of it, now that's a problem. Children can't relax if they feel a lot of pressure to succeed and not mess up, feeling it would be terrible if they made a mistake. Many children are so terrified of making a mistake, they're afraid to try anything new. We need to let kids know it's okay to make a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes, even we do. The only way to completely avoid mistakes is to stay with what you already know to stop growing, right? If you want to be sure you don't make a mistake, the only way to do that is to stay with what you already know. Because if you go beyond what you know, by definition, you don't know. It's a 50-50 chance of being right or wrong. So if you want to be sure you won't make a mistake, don't venture beyond what you already know. But if you don't go beyond what you already know, you're not going to learn. Einstein said, anybody who's never made a mistake has never tried anything new. When my students are doing experiments where they're testing out hypotheses, and they get so disappointed when their hypothesis isn't confirmed. They put a year or 2 years into the study to test their hypothesis, and then it turns out they were wrong. And they're very upset. And I tell them, rejoice. Now you have the opportunity to learn something you never knew. Right? If your hypothesis is confirmed, all you're learning is that what you thought was right was right. If your hypothesis isn't confirmed, now you're going to learn something we never knew before. All of the discoveries I've made have come when my hypotheses weren't confirmed, because I had to go beyond what we already knew. Children need to feel safe, to push the limits of what they know, to venture into the unknown, to take the risk of making a mistake or being wrong. They can't relax if they're worried you might embarrass them. They can't relax if they feel a lot of pressure to always succeed and never mess up. Making a mistake is not a problem. Suffering embarrassment because you made a mistake is a problem. Maria Montessori was at the far extreme about this. She said, no matter if he does it wrong, do not correct him, or he will retire into his shell. So a lot of Montessori materials in themselves will tell you if something is wrong. Like the peg boards I showed yesterday, if you end up with a big peg in a small hole, you may not know what you did wrong, but you know you did something wrong. So a lot of times the material itself will correct you. Otherwise, what the teacher will do is not then, but later that day or the next day, the teacher will show again how to do it correctly. The teacher won't refer to, well, you did it wrong, so I'm going to show you again how to do it right. The teacher will just show how to do it again. It's important to try to minimize stresses in kids' lives and to give them better ways to handle the stress in their lives. One very important way to reduce young children's stress is to make their daily routine and their environment in class as predictable as possible. Regularities and consistencies they can count on. Items can always be found in the same place. Each day has the same familiar rhythm. Young children need regularity and order. So stress reducers for little kids is predictability, consistency, clear expectations, clarity about what is and is not permitted, a stable routine, things in their place, knowing what to expect. So you may think it makes for interesting variety and joy to rearrange things in the classroom, because now you have another beautiful environment, but it's really disturbing for the kids. They like to know that this is there and that is there, and change can be unsettling for little kids. Or kids who have disorders like autism, for example. Touch relieves stress. Born 12 weeks early, these twins were risked into separate incubators. Brielle had breathing and heart rate problems, didn't gain weight, and fussed when anyone tried to comfort her. Finally, a nurse put the two sisters together against hospital regulations. As Brielle dozed, Kyrie wrapped her arm around her smallest sibling. With her sister nearby, Brielle began to calm down and thrive. Sooner than expected, the girls went home. Hugs are superb medicine. Babies in the NICU get kangaroo care leave in half the time of babies in incubators and are usually much healthier and much better survival rates. Exercise reduces stress. Virtually any form of exercise, from aerobics to a nature hike to yoga, can reduce stress. Pets reduce stress. There's a lot of studies that the presence of a dog in the classroom reduces stress and helps children do better.
I have a dog in my classroom. I go to school every day, and the whole school loves it.
Yes. The kids are less stressed, they make less mistakes, they pay better attention, etc. It's also evidence that it doesn't matter what your age is, bringing a dog to work reduces stress for adults. Animals give unconditional affection, they ask little in return, they don't hold a grudge, and they don't even require eye contact. Meditation reduces stress. Several Montessori activities are essentially walking meditation, though Montessori never called them that. And walking meditation is much more age appropriate than sitting and concentrating on your breathing. So for little kids, walking on a line on the ground is as difficult as for us to walk on a balance beam or a tightrope. So it's a kind of meditation exercise just to do the concentration to walk on the line. By the way, before an exam, if you simply have the kids take a few deep breaths, in general, they'll do better on the exam. Just that much of meditation, which is hardly any meditation at all. Just taking the deep breaths, they'll do better on the test. It's important that children do things that give them joy. Joy is not the opposite of serious. And that's really important because often if your kids are having a great time in your classroom and the principal walks by, he thinks that they're not learning. They must be at recess or something. Serious business like learning can and should be joyful. Research shows that we learn more and get more done and are more creative when we're happy. People show more creativity when they're happy. The most heavily researched predictor of creativity in social psychology is mood. The most robust finding is that a happy mood leads to greater creativity. It enables people to work more flexibly and to see potential relatedness among unusual and atypical members of categories. It doesn't mean that sadder people are less creative than happier people. But what it means is that in general, and there are always exceptions, in general, within an individual, usually you're more creative when you're happier than when you're more miserable. The distinction between work and play disappears when you're doing something you thoroughly enjoy. So are these little kids working or playing? Little kids love to do adult chores, adult work. Are these kids working or playing? Are these kids working or playing? Whether something is work, that means onerous, or play, fun, is not an intrinsic property of the activity. Math, history, or any other activity can be fun. Similarly, the distinction between academic and enrichment activities is arbitrary. Critical executive function skills like reasoning, problem solving, self-control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility can be taught through the arts, physical activity, carpentry, auto mechanics, or play. Another route to loving what you're doing is feeling you're making a positive difference, making the world a better place, or helping your family or community. Research shows that what brings people the most happiness is making other people happy, helping others, seeing the smile on someone's face because of something you did. Happiness runs in a circular motion. And to help others needier than you also helps you feel that your own troubles are not so bad after all. So David Yeager has done this wonderful research looking at what he calls a sense of purpose message. It's a really very minimal intervention. It only takes 45 minutes. It's delivered on the computer, so you don't even have a researcher come to the school. And what happens is for the first 15 minutes, somebody talks about how you should work hard in school because the skills you learn in school will help you be able to help your community or help right the wrongs in the world or help your family. It'll help others. Then for 15 minutes, they see another child talk about that, how what that child is learning in school helps the child to be able to do things to help others. And for the last 15 minutes, the child is encouraged to talk about how what they're learning in school might help them be able to help others. And kids are very good at telling you what stinks in the world, what's not working. So if you tell them that what they're learning in school can help them fix that, help them work on that, help them make the world better, they respond. The control condition is the same 45 minutes, but instead of talking about you should work hard in school so that you can help your community or the world, you should work hard in school because it'll help you get a better job or earn more money. Okay? So it's the same parallel, the same 15 minutes of this, 15 minutes of that, 15 minutes of this. In one case, it's in order to help the world. In one case, it's to help you. So what they found, and they looked across the US, is that among kids at risk of dropping out of high school, their grade point averages go up, their likelihood of dropping out of high school goes down if they hear the message about helping others. If they hear the message about that it'll help them, it doesn't help them a twit. It doesn't move the needle at all. There are lots of other studies. So in one study, they asked the teachers to give a really boring exam. A task. So the researchers designed something to be incredibly boring, okay? And the teachers give it to the kids. If the kids got the sense of purpose message, then they're much more likely to do it and to finish it. If they got the message of working hard to help themselves, they're less likely to do it and much less likely to finish it. So there's lots of research that shows that the pro-social message really helps them do better in school. The self-oriented message doesn't affect how they do. Children naturally, intrinsically, are moved to want to right wrongs and make the world a better place. We should encourage and support their desire for social justice and their urge to take active steps to make a positive contribution.